Hello, everyone from London. Welcome again to this live streaming of R.A.C.E. And today we have a very special guest. Today we have here with us Carla. And Carla has been with us for the previous live streamings as our co-host. But today she's the guest because she has been working a lot in raising awareness on well-being and education, which is a topic that we really care for. You might also know her for being the host in Wonder and Wellbeing podcast. So let's welcome Carla. Hello.
Hello, Angela. Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. You know that we absolutely love you and we love what you do. So why don't we start by telling everyone, what is it that you do?
Well, can I start with what I used to do? What I used to do is, I used to teach special education. I did that for 15 years, up until August of last year. And just before I left, I kind of knew I was going to leave because I had a teacher burnout, I would call it, in early 2018. I started to take really ill, and I knew that it was because I was doing too much work and not taking care of my well-being. So at that time, I started to plan what I would do when I left. And one of the things that I did was start a podcast. So I went away and trained myself on how to start a podcast. And then I started the podcast all about how to support teacher and parent well-being. And I did that more and more in the period before I was transitioning out of education. And basically, I do that now. I do the podcast. I also do some work with podcast coaching. So I help other people to build podcasts and some other creative work. I'm working a lot on my writing at the moment, which was always my dream. I wanted to be a writer, not a teacher. So, I know. I ended up, as a lot of writers do, or lovers of creative things, a lot of lovers of art and things like that go into teaching art because it gives you a way to talk about and do all of the things that you love, but also to help kids to develop those skills. But now the teaching has kind of gone to the background. I do some coaching work and some consulting and that kind of stuff, but that's not at the forefront. That's more in the background on an ad hoc basis. And a lot of that, I turn it down, to be honest. I turn that down to focus more on the podcast and podcasting and creative work. I do a collaborative project as well with a group of podcasters. We do a weekly live stream, Podcasters Unleashed, and we work together to kind of develop our individual podcasts and develop the craft of podcasting and live stream. So it's like a combination of things, but it's all about creative things. That's where I'm working at the moment.
Okay, well, that's interesting. It's actually very, very nice to know that you were in the education, up front there, like hands-on, and that you mentioned that you had burnout, because I'm sure that lots of teachers can relate to that word that haunts us every time. I think that not only when you're a teacher, but in other professions as well, but teaching specifically, has a lot of burnout teachers. And so now tell us, why were you driven to join R.A.C.E. specifically?
I think I found it by accident online, and I saw it and I said, coaching for teachers. That's interesting. And I'd already had an episode with another, actually, no, that's how I found out about it. I'd had an episode, I'd Googled for guests for the podcast, and I found this guy who was doing coaching for teachers. And I was like, coaching for teachers, that's awesome. That's just what teaching needs. And then as I started to do more research and I got to know him and we did an episode together and everything, he spoke about R.A.C.E. And then I went away and Googled R.A.C.E. and found out about Beatrix and all of you guys that were joining and how fast it was growing. And I just thought it was awesome. I just thought, I wish that had been around when I was teaching, because I would have definitely joined that group and that would have probably stopped me from having a burnout,
Exactly. So do you think that, that other teachers have like I don't know, specific behaviors that could tell them or their colleagues that they are actually experiencing a burnout, you might think?
Definitely. I think that we all know when we're not performing at our best, when our well-being isn't first in our lives. And I think that stress, we use this word stress all the time, but we use it as if it's something that's normal, something that's acceptable. Oh, I'm so stressed. Oh, this is stressing me out. Oh, these kids are stressing me out. My colleagues are stressing me out. I think if stress is a big factor in your life, if you're feeling anxious when you're on the way to work and you're feeling exhausted on the way home from work, if you're having more and more sick days, or you're having more and more days where you just find yourself wanting to spend more time away from people, and just getting tasks done and turning up to the classroom and just ticking things off, then I think that it's very likely that you're either on your way to a burnout or you're in one.
Okay. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's actually quite interesting that you mentioned that you found R.A.C.E, and then when you started reading about it, you found that it was coaching for teachers, while some, I don't know, a couple of months ago or a year ago, you were actually experiencing burnout yourself. And then you might think like, you know what, coaching could have helped me in that moment. You think that coaching can actually help teachers and can help, teachers feel better while they're, while they're doing, teaching, basically, while they're teaching, or while they are carrying out all the extra activities that normally teachers do? You think that?
Absolutely. Yeah. For me personally, I believe it's essential, which is why I support R.A.C.E 100%. It's almost impossible to teach without coaching. And actually, informally coaching exists in teaching, in the teaching profession, because quite often teachers are coaching each other. But the problem with that is that quite often they're in the same boat. So you're being coached by other colleagues who are in the same school as you, facing the same issues that you're facing. And quite often that dynamic doesn't really work in the way that we want it to work. And that's why I think that coaches that are separate from the school are much better than just having this informal coaching system between you and your friends, or you and your colleagues that are just supporting each other. I think it's absolutely necessary. And I know that it exists in a lot of university programs and training programs for teachers. You have coaching as part of your development as a teacher. But again, it's informal. So it doesn't introduce how important it is. By making these things informal, it's almost saying that it's optional. But for me, from what I've seen and from my own experience in teaching, it isn't optional, it's a must.
Okay. All right. I'm going to go now and share some of the questions and comments from our audience. All right. So let's see. We have Beatrix Henkel on the other side of the screen now. Hello, Beatrix. And she has a question. She says, what do you think are the signs of burnout, Carla, and what prevention tips you have for teachers? That's a great question.
Yeah, so the burnout tips, in addition to the ones I already mentioned, which is just feeling an overwhelming sense of stress and all the things that we know are associated with that. I think like the loss of the love for the job. If you know that you wanted to be a teacher and you wanted to be in education, but now you're kind of second guessing that a few years down the line and wondering what the heck you did and whether and why you did it, then I would say that that's a warning sign. But also all the physical things that we associate with just not feeling a sense of wellness, lots of headaches, addictions. I think addiction to caffeine is one that we often dismiss. So it's like, I need a coffee. And it's almost like part of the culture. But the fact is, if you need a coffee in order to stimulate you mentally, then that means that the job or whatever you're doing is not doing that. Or it means that you're so tired that your brain and body just aren't functioning optimally. You shouldn't need a coffee all the time in order to function. So I think things like that. And it's that swing between coffee all day and wine in the night. It's like, if you're going through anything like that, then that's definitely a sign. But then there are also things like not having enough time to exercise. If you say that I haven't had a workout for a long time because I just have this really busy job, that's a disaster, really. Another teacher phenomena of wolfing down your lunch. It's like this lunch on the go, swallowing it and running to class kind of thing, or missing it altogether. I think those basic things of taking care of your body are often missing when you're having a burnout. Also, things like having problems in your personal life, and this vicious cycle of stressed out days and then stressed out evenings or weekends as well, where you're expecting people at home, your kids or your partner or your family members, to make up for the fact that you've got an excess workload. So now you're doing work at home because there's too much pressure in the office and all of that kind of stuff. I think those are all classic warning signs. And just an overall not feeling great about what you do every day, losing that passion and being like, oh God, is it Monday morning again?
I like your answer because you mentioned things that we normally do every single day. And for some reason, we are taught, or we're so used to them, that we actually think that they're okay and normal. So it's actually quite nice that you have pointed that out. Thank you very much. I'm going to carry on with some of the comments. Karen Cruz says that she has listened to your podcast, Carla, and that it is great.
Thank you. Share them. Share my podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And Martin is our regular here. We love his comments. And he says, an outsider perspective is necessary for breakthrough.
And Martin is the guy that I mentioned that was the guest. It's Martin. Martin was the person that first put me onto coaching for education because he did some awesome work. And it's his area of passion since he's not been in the classroom as well. So that's the guy.
Yeah. And a sneak peek, Martin's going to be our next guest. So imagine everything starts to getting, like a puzzle. Every piece is joining, which is amazing. All right. And, Carla, you were talking about all these routines that normally we have, and we're talking about taking care of ourselves and taking care, of our physical, mental health and everything. But I would like you to tell the audience, what is well-being? What is that? What does it mean to have a well-being, or to have a culture of well-being in your life or in your workplace?
Yeah, this is a great one. People always ask this because it's so difficult to define. But I always define it as when your life is in a holistic balance. So that means, and this goes back to the question that Beatrix asked in the comments about the prevention. When you have a balanced routine in your life where every area of your life is getting some attention and all of your needs as a human being are being met, then you naturally fall into this state of well-being. But when there's an imbalance where one area of your life is getting more attention and all of your energy, basically, then you're going to go down the road of not being well or losing the balance in your well-being. So if everything's all about work, if work takes up a majority of your time, but it isn't work that gives you this spark of joy or infuses you with energy, then you're going to lose the balance of your well-being. If you're worrying about bills, if you're super stressed out, if you're not getting along with people in your life and your relationships are not balanced, these are all the things that we know are not well-being. So quite often when people ask me what well-being is, it's often that you give the answer of what it's not, because then people begin to understand it, because otherwise it sounds a bit abstract.
Okay.
So when we say well-being is and define it, and also it's different for everyone. So feeling that sense of balance, some people can give a 12-hour day and not lose anything spiritually, emotionally, physically, but other people can only give a 4-hour day before they start to drain, in terms of energy. Things like personality traits, if you're introverted and extroverted. I found that out much later in life that I'm actually naturally introverted. And so what was happening to me in a classroom full of children all day, and then a staff room full of peers, and then a house full of family, I was having no individual personal time. And so I was getting drained on all angles and I wasn't doing enough to put back in. So it's an individual thing, but I guess it's just that quest for balance. That I would say, if I had to sum it up in a short way, it's just an overall balance in your life.
Okay, well, that's amazing that you actually bring into the conversation the personality types and the fact that someone's well-being might not look the same as somebody else's well-being, because sometimes we find, in social media and everywhere, that there are these tips and 10 things to feel better about yourself and or to have a well-balanced life. And it's true that balance doesn't mean the same for everybody, especially if you're introverted or extroverted, which means basically where you get your energy from, or how your energy is drained. Because sometimes people might think that being introverted or extroverted is being social or not being shy about, showing yourself in front of the camera, for example. And sometimes people misunderstand those two concepts. So I'm very, very grateful that you actually bring that and put it on the table. There are more comments about the people, and I'm going to start sharing them. Give me a second. Okay, so, right. So Karen says, I think teachers bringing their stress into the classroom is quite damaging. I've seen teachers lose it in the classroom, and some of that is because of the stresses they hold, and these affects their tolerance levels. Very sad to see. With these comments, I think that we can start talking about how that well-being or that balance in your life influences or impacts learning and teaching. So what would you like to tell us about that? You're the expert, Carla.
Absolutely. Thank you, Karen. Spot on. This is one of the reasons that contributed to my burnout in teaching. It was the behavior and attitude of colleagues. And specifically colleagues who had lost interest in being teachers but weren't sure how they were going to reconcile that within themselves. And so had this war going on, and you could see that. So they'd be in the staff room or in the learning environment, giving all sorts of tips about how you can improve education and all of this kind of thing. But actually they didn't want to be there. And what they were doing was making it really difficult for people who did want to be there. And they would not, I don't think it's conscious. It's very much subconscious, but they really drag down the tone and the energy, not only for their colleagues, but as Karen said, they're more detrimentally for students. So I would often have students coming to me and saying, teacher, why is that other teacher angry all the time? And that's such an awkward situation to be put in. And then you have to be super diplomatic. And that also isn't good for you because it's a form of lying, isn't it? And being super diplomatic over too many years is also not great for your energy because you want to be honest. And we're all more in a state of well-being when we're honest. And that doesn't mean being without a filter, but being able to just speak the truth. And with children, quite often when other adults are not doing things in the right way and you've got to lie to children, you're like, well, this is awkward.
Yes.
So yeah, I experienced that a lot. And it is sad. It's very sad. And children can be demanding. Don't get me wrong. It's a very stressful profession in itself. And I think that's why I always advocate for people being well, because if the profession is already stressful and unpredictable and demanding, but then you're bringing this other kind of toxic energy and not being able to balance your own well-being into the environment, that just makes things worse for everybody. And it's kind of counterproductive as well. You're not really educating children and students on the things that you think you're educating them on. You're educating them also on how to live successful and happy lives. And that's something that often gets overlooked when the balance goes off,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's true. I'm going to carry on reading because today is just you and me. So I need to keep up with all the comments. So I'm going to start sharing some questions and some comments as well. Okay, so Jamila says, hello, Jamila. Lovely to see you here. Great insights for self-care to care of others as well. And Martin said, I used to think that let me show you the comment. I used to think that I had to give everything to be doing my teaching job properly. Sadly, the school management team thought so too, which is also very important as well to not only bring the well-being into yourself, but also create a culture of well-being into the school. Do you have any suggestions, for example, as as an expert in your podcast and from all the experience that you have with your guests and your work as well? Do you think that there is something that teachers can do to actually start promoting a culture of well-being?
Yeah, and I think it starts with what Martin was talking about there. We have to end this culture of revering people who are stressed out and busy, super busy all the time. I think teaching isn't the only profession that we do it. We do it everywhere, pretty much. But it's this whole image of this super stressed out, dynamic person who can do everything and glug coffee and go for a run. And it's like the super high performer and is always meeting every target. I think we have to understand that that's an unrealistic image. And it's not something that we should aspire to, and definitely not in teaching. And it's become part of the culture. It's growing more and more in education, where you not only do you have to teach now, but you also have to do extracurricular activities, and you also have to be super progressing towards management, and you also have to be studying on the side. And now, not only that, you've got to write books and be a social media influencer on top of all of that. And it's just ridiculous, and that culture has to end. And I think we have to not advocate for that in education, but also not hold these characters who are, let's face it, above and beyond human. If they're doing all of that and looking after themselves, they are in a very small minority. And we don't want to put them up as the ideal for everybody to strive towards. But then after that as well, I think it begins with each individual knowing where their limit is and knowing what they want in their lives in terms of balance and working towards that. And knowing when to say, well, no, I can't manage that because it's too much. Many times I didn't do that. And I remember being sent more and more tasks and smiling politely and answering emails and running back and forth and, thinking that that was a good thing, but eventually realizing that it wasn't sustainable. So I think we have to do that, know our natural limit, and be comfortable with saying to management or colleagues, well, actually, I would really love to help with that, but actually, I'm really full up right now. Or my students are taking all of my time and energy. The planning is leaving me flat out, and I really can't do an extracurricular club because it's going to affect my teaching. I think the more that teachers become comfortable with that and just saying, this is my limit and I want to do this that I've got right here on my plate and do it really well, the more that we can bring in that culture that makes maybe the management and other people realize that maybe we're pushing it too far. And I think that includes things like taking care of your physical needs in the workplace as well, which is the basics of taking care of a human body, isn't it? Make sure you're drinking enough and that you're sleeping and having those things in your routine first. That's what I find now. The difference between my life now and my life when I was a teacher is that the first things I put down on my schedule is what I need for me to be balanced. And then everything goes in around that. And I think that you can move towards that even if you stay in the classroom. So I put down your lunch break. After I got sick, the first thing that would go on my schedule was my lunch break, because I realized that I hadn't been eating lunch. And that was one of the factors that had made me really ill over the years. And then I decided when I was going to have coffee, and I would stop at that. So I'd have it in the morning. And that meant that when the whole brain fog kicked in the afternoon, I couldn't take coffee to alleviate that. So I had to arrange the whole schedule around what I would and wouldn't do in the afternoon as a result of not being able to rely on another coffee and another and another. But it took time. It did take time to refine that. And unfortunately for me, in my case, it was out of necessity. I just took sick and I had to go and have a surgery. And then I came back and I had no choice but to take care of myself. I made sure that I put my walk in every single day on the schedule, so that if I didn't get it done, I felt guilty about not doing that more than I felt guilty about not getting an extra lesson plan in, because I understood then that if I didn't do that, then I wouldn't be doing any lesson plans in a few months' time. But it did take a whole mental shift for me to get to that point. So that would be my tip, is to rearrange the way that you schedule things so that your well-being is put in first. And anyone who wants to argue with them, just send them to Carla. Ask that woman from Wonder Wellbeing. She'll tell you, because it's serious. It's really serious,
Yeah, send them to Wonder and Wellbeing podcast. Just listen to that first, and then we'll have a chat.
Yeah,
that's great. I'm going to carry on with some of the questions and some of the comments here, because everything that you're saying is absolutely spot on, Carla. I mean, I think that most of the people that are, related to R.A.C.E, we have been teachers ourselves. We have been there. We have skipped lunch more than we should have. And we have, put on extra and extra and extra work throughout the years. Okay, let me see if I can catch up with the comments. So please bear with me a second. Okay, so Beatrix asked a question. I'm not sure if you have answered it yet, but she wants to know what has changed since you started your podcast.
Oh, a whole lot. I think COVID has completely changed. I left teaching last year, August. I left Doha, where I was teaching in August. And just before I left there, the school had shifted into online education. So when I first started my podcast, we were in school, we were teaching in the classroom full time. When I left, we were online, completely online. And so in the time that I've been developing the podcast, I've seen this big focus on online teaching and on the pressure being shared between schools and parents. And that's been a massive change. Last year, that made a significant change, even to the types of guests that I was booking or reaching out to for my podcast. And actually, my podcast was on pause for a long time while I kind of made a full assessment, not only of my own life and where I wanted to take the podcast, but also what was happening on the scene of education. Because a lot of the episodes or the guests that I had planned before that were no longer relevant. It wasn't the type of thing that people wanted to hear about, talk about, and be informed about. Now there's a lot of emphasis on parents being much more aware of what's going on behind the scenes. And I've had some parents reach out to me and ask questions that I never thought parents would ask, which were in relation to things like school curriculum. And they wanted to know in detail how schools were planning curriculums, why certain things were on the curriculum, why other things weren't. So I think parents' awareness has been the biggest change that I've seen. But also a newfound respect for teachers. Over the last year, lots of parents have been saying, wow, I really take my hat off to teachers. You guys are incredible. And a lot of parents are pushing and advocating and joining campaigns for things like increases in teachers' pay, just as a result of COVID and realizing how much teachers actually do. But also I know in some parts of the world, there's this new kind of relationship that's developing between parents and teachers, because kids are going in and out, back and forth between school, in a lockdown and out of a lockdown and that kind of thing. So it's creating this dialogue, isn't it, between schools and teachers and parents and home, which is a really nice thing to see. That's a really nice change since I started the podcast. That's probably something that I think a lot of people were crying out for in the past, is that just that respect for teachers and that connection between parents and teachers as joint educators of children.
True, correct. That's so true. And yeah, I think that the word for that answer is respect for teachers. And Jamila wants to know, because we have just a couple of minutes now, how coaching can reduce stress and increase well-being among teachers.
I think this coaching is a tool that's so key for teachers because they know it already. A lot of times, in coaching, this is that you have to convince people for a long time first, and then you start introducing the tools to them. But with teachers, because they know the foundations of what it is to be educated and what it is to develop yourself, you don't need to convince them. You can just go straight in with the tools. And once you introduce those coaching tools and those coaching strategies to teachers, it becomes like a gift for them, because sometimes their mind is just so occupied with helping other people, they forget to help themselves. But when you approach them with coaching strategies and tools, they give that little bit of focus to themselves and their own thinking and their own goals and their own plan and strategies for getting there. And when it comes to things like stress, we all know that coaching deals with stress in such an incredible way by just helping people to see where they are now in terms of their stress levels and how their management of it goes, and helping them to plan steps practically of how to get to where they want to be. And there isn't anything that I've ever seen over the years that does this better than coaching. And so with stress, which is the biggest factor in teacher well-being, coaching's a no-brainer. There's no reason not to do it. And once you've done it with stress, you can do it with all the other things like your exercise plan and your eating habits and your personal relationships and, all of those other things that might affect your well-being.
Okay, thank you. And let me remove the comment from the screen. And I'm going to share more comments from the audience. So, there is a question here from Jacob hello, Jacob. And he says, how could teachers deal with the fear of losing a job that makes them rather suffer the burnout?
Oh, that's a good one, isn't it? That's a really good one. Okay, two things I would say with that one. The first thing is fire yourself before you get fired. And what I mean by that is don't go and do something crazy in the staff room. Don't do it. No matter how stressful it gets, don't go crazy on the students. But have a plan of action in place about when you're going to exit from teaching. I always told myself many years ago that I would exit from teaching when I got tired of teaching people's children, because they are people's children. And you have to remember that these are special to somebody. So no matter how much they stress you out, you have to treat them with care. And if you get to a point where you can't do that for whatever reason, it's time to exit. And you have to have a plan in place in order to do that. So decide, am I going to do this for life or not? And if you're going to do it for life, you have to have a plan in place of how you're going to manage that, especially when it gets stressful. But if you're not going to do it for life, then you have to decide when you're going to leave, and you have to have a plan in place for how you're going to do that. And that goes to the second thing, which is to have a backup plan. What else are you going to do afterwards? And that's why I did the podcast. I started the podcast because I knew that I still wanted to keep in the loop, and I wanted to share what I'd learned with other people and support teachers and parents so that kids could still get the best, but without me being on the ground in teaching, which I knew I just didn't have the strength and energy or the desire to do anymore. So those are the two things I would say, is plan and exit, but also have something else that you do that you know that you can use to make money, because that's important for well-being. Financial well-being is a key area of well-being, and we can't deny that, you know.
Right, that's true. Well, Carla, thank you very much. 30 minutes run out really quickly when we're talking about, yeah, I know, when we're talking about such interesting topics that have to do with well-being, education, coaching, learning, race, so many things to talk about. But I think that the audience has contributed really nicely and well on expressing concerns, questions as well. And we have to say that definitely, if you are a teacher that is experiencing burnout, find yourself a coach. Where to find that coach? R.A.C.E is the place as well to find coaches, and so much more for all the stakeholders in the education system. So thank you very much, Carla, for joining us. And thank you, everyone, for being here, for your questions, and for raising awareness for coaching in education. Thank you, and see you next Wednesday. Bye-bye.